I had been driving on logging roads in Oregon for years, so I wasn't the kind of person who got nervous just because a road looked rough. In fact, I usually liked the roads that made my friends turn around. The trip I remember the most started because my truck needed a battery. I decided to take it somewhere quiet for a weekend after getting it fixed. I picked a forest road of Mount Hood that I had never driven before. There was no campground at the end, an old turnout beside a creek shown on an outdated paper map I kept in the glove box. I got there in the afternoon, parked under a group of fir trees, and started making coffee before setting up my tent. Everything felt normal until I noticed a length of rope tied between two trees across the road behind me. It wasn't blocking the road completely. It made the entrance narrow enough that I had to duck under it. I assumed it was some logging marker and didn't think much about it. After dark, the forest got completely quiet. Then I heard a metal clank somewhere behind the truck. I stepped outside with my flashlight, looked around. Nothing. I checked the truck, found the tailgate slightly open. I was sure I had shut it. I closed it, locked the truck, and went back to the tent. It felt odd. An hour later, I heard the same clank again. This time it came from down the road. I listened for a vehicle. There wasn't one. Then I heard 3 taps on metal. Pause. 3 taps. I told myself it was probably a branch hitting a sign or some leftover gear. The morning I found a small blue backpack hanging from a branch about 50 yards from my campsite. It looked old and dirty. The zipper was still closed. I didn't touch it. I walked back to my truck. Noticed something that bothered me more. There were tire tracks beside my truck. They weren't mine. They came from the road, stopped beside my campsite, and then turned around in the mud. There had been no rain overnight, so I knew they were fresh. I packed my things. Decided to leave, but when I started the truck, the engine only clicked. The battery was dead again. I spent the hour checking cables and trying everything I knew. Nothing worked. I finally decided to walk toward the main road and find enough cell service to call for help. Before leaving, I grabbed my keys. Locked the truck. I hadn't gone than a quarter mile when I heard an engine behind me. A white pickup came slowly around the bend. It stopped beside me. A man leaned across the passenger seat and asked if I needed a ride. He was probably in his 40s, wearing a hoodie and a knit cap. I told him I was fine and that my truck had broken down. He asked where I'd parked. I pointed back toward the road. He looked at me for a second, said, "You shouldn't leave it there." I asked why. He shrugged. "People mess with stuff here." Then he drove away. That sentence bothered me because he'd said it like he knew where my truck was. I kept walking. 40 minutes later, I reached a spot with weak service and called a friend. While I was waiting for him to answer, I heard the sound of a vehicle coming from the direction I'd just walked. I turned around, saw the same white pickup. It slowed down beside me. The man rolled down the window and said, "Changed your mind?" I said no. He stared at me for a second, then drove past. My friend couldn't come until the following morning, so I walked back toward the campsite because there wasn't else I could do. When I got close, I noticed the rope across the road was gone. I hadn't removed it. I could see the loose ends hanging from the trees where someone had untied it. My truck was still there. The driver's door was open. I had locked it. I stopped 30 yards away and just watched it. I didn't want to walk up to the truck. After a minute, I called out asking if anybody was there. No answer. I walked closer, looked inside. Nothing seemed missing. The glove box was open though. The paper map I'd been using was spread across the passenger seat. Someone had circled the turnout where I was parked. Under the map was a folded piece of paper. It had one sentence on it. "You weren't supposed to find this road." I left the truck there, walked back toward the main road. I didn't care about my gear anymore. I didn't care about the truck. I just wanted to get with other people around. My friend picked me up the morning with another truck and a tow strap. When we returned, my truck was gone. We reported it stolen. A deputy asked me if I'd seen anyone suspicious. I described the man in the pickup and told him about the note. He wrote everything down, then asked me to show him where I'd been camping. We drove there together. The turnout looked completely different in daylight. The blue backpack was still hanging from the tree. The deputy walked over, opened it, and immediately told me not to touch anything. Inside were photographs, a flashlight, several empty food wrappers, and a small notebook. The photographs were of vehicles parked at different places along the forest roads. Some were taken from away through trees. One of them was a picture of my truck. The photograph had been taken before I arrived at the campsite. The deputy asked when I'd taken the picture. I hadn't. He looked through the notebook, found several dates written beside descriptions of vehicles. Some entries were years old. The last few were weeks apart. My truck was listed on the page before I ever drove onto that road. I never found out who had been watching that area or why. My truck was recovered 3 weeks later from a county. Nothing inside had been stolen except the paper map. I've driven through the Pacific Northwest plenty of times since then. I still camp. I don't use random forest turnouts anymore. If I see something blocking a road, I don't assume it's logging equipment. And if a stranger tells me I'm parked somewhere I shouldn't be, I listen the time. I had been driving for 3 hours when I realized I had no plan for where to sleep that night. I left Portland after work on a Friday with the idea that I would figure things out once I got closer to the coast. I had done this before, so I was not worried. I had a sleeping bag in the back of my SUV, some food, a flashlight, and enough gas to get me somewhere. My plan was to drive through the Coast Range, find a spot near a river, and camp until Sunday. I was not even supposed to be on the road I ended up taking. I missed a turn near Banks because I was playing with the radio, and instead of turning around, I just kept going. The road got narrow after a while. The pavement turned into gravel. There were no houses, no streetlights, and no signs. Every mile I passed a wooden gate or an old logging road that disappeared into the trees. 9 that evening I saw a small green sign pointing toward an old Forest Service campground. I followed the sign because I thought a marked campground was safer than trying to find a spot in the dark. The road ended at a parking area beside a river. There were 6 or 7 campsites, a rusted information board, and an old concrete bathroom building that looked like no one had used it in years. I parked, walked around for a minute, and picked a site near the river. I remember thinking I was lucky because I could not see another vehicle anywhere. I had just finished setting up my tent when I noticed something about the campground. Every picnic table had been turned down. They were not thrown around. They were just flipped over carefully with the benches facing the ground. I walked around looking at the picnic tables because it was such a thing to see. One of the picnic tables had a message carved into the bottom. It said, "Don't leave food." That did not seem unusual to worry about. Bears were a possibility. Maybe whoever looks after the place put the picnic tables that way for a reason. I cooked dinner, cleaned everything up, and put my food inside the SUV. Around 11 I heard something moving across the campground. I thought it was an animal. Then I heard a picnic table scrape against the gravel. I sat up inside the tent. Listened. Another scrape followed. I turned on my flashlight. Looked outside through the tent opening. Nothing. All the picnic tables were still down. I waited a few minutes. Went back to sleep. I woke up sometime after 2 because I heard a vehicle door slam. I checked my phone. 2:41. I could hear an engine idling near the entrance to the campground. I stayed inside the tent because I did not want to deal with whoever had arrived in the middle of the night. A minute later the engine shut off. I expected to hear someone setting up a tent. Instead there was just silence. Then I heard footsteps coming toward my campsite. The footsteps stopped beside my SUV. I heard the driver's door handle move. Once. Then twice. Whoever it was tried the hatch too. I sat there still. The hatch opened in inches and then closed. After that the footsteps moved toward the river. I did not hear anything for almost 20 minutes. Eventually I fell asleep. When I woke up the morning I found a wet footprint on the floor mat inside my SUV. I had not opened the SUV after going to bed. I checked the doors. Realized the rear hatch had not locked properly. That explained how someone might have gotten inside. I could not understand why there was only one footprint. There were no prints outside the vehicle. There was one wet boot print on the mat. I packed my things. Decided to leave. Before driving, I walked down toward the river because I wanted to see if there was another road out of the campground. 100 yards from the campsites, I found an old wooden footbridge. It crossed a part of the river and led into a thick area of trees. There was a faded sign beside it warning people not to cross because the footbridge was unstable. I turned around. That is when I saw someone standing across the river. It was a man. He was wearing a jacket and jeans, and he was standing completely still between two trees. I could not see his face clearly because he was away, and the branches blocked most of him. I raised my hand. Waved, mostly because I did not know what else to do. He did not wave back. Instead, he pointed behind me. I turned around. There was nobody there. When I looked back across the river, the man was gone. I went straight to my SUV. Started the engine. It started normally. I was halfway down the gravel road when I saw a pickup parked on the side. It was the dark green color as the trees around it, and I almost drove past without noticing it. As I passed, the driver stepped out, raised his hand. I stopped because I thought maybe he needed help. He walked toward my window, asked if I had been camping at the old campground. I said yes. He looked toward the road behind me, said, "You shouldn't stay there." I asked him why. He said, "People don't." That was it. I asked if he was talking about bears or something else. He did not answer. He just looked past me toward the back of my SUV. Then he said, "You need to leave before dark." I thanked him, drove away. I should have listened. Instead, I drove 20 minutes before realizing my phone was still sitting on the campground picnic table. I had left my phone there while packing. I was angry at myself. I turned around. I figured I would grab my phone quickly and leave. When I reached the campground, my SUV's tracks were still visible from earlier. There was another set of tracks beside them. Someone had followed me. My phone was sitting where I had left it, except the screen was on. There was a photo in my camera roll. It showed me sleeping inside my tent. The picture had been taken from outside. I did not stop to look for anything. I grabbed my phone, ran back to the SUV. As I drove away, I saw the same man from the river standing near the entrance. He was not trying to stop me. He was just watching. I never went back to that campground. Months later, I looked it up online and found an old news article about the area. The campground had been closed for years after many reports of people entering vehicles and following campers at night. Nobody had ever been arrested. The campground was eventually removed from the maps. The strange part is that the road sign I followed that night was still there. It should not have been. The road had supposedly been closed before the campground itself was shut down. I still have the phone. I deleted that photograph years ago. I remember exactly what it looked like. The camera was close to the tent. It was close enough that whoever took it would have been standing a few feet from where my head was resting. My name is Dan, and this particular experience happened when I was 28 years old working in Idaho for a small construction company. I mostly did repair work in the area, and I enjoyed the drive around these parts because when you are on the back roads it takes about half an hour to see another vehicle, or when you are not in the bigger cities. One Friday, in the month of October, I decided to go over to a cabin my friend has mentioned to me one weekend because it was on the way to Elk River. He had told me the cabin was empty as his daughter was ill, so he let me have the use of it until Sunday when he was well enough to return himself. When I left, I had a few things in my car that I picked up at the store on the way, and I figured I would get there before dark, as I had driven through the area before, and it was no big deal. The main road I took was slick from the rain, but when I turned onto the smaller county roads, it was all woods and open fields for a good while. About 20 minutes or so before I was supposed to arrive, I noticed a dark blue SUV at the side of a dirt road. I thought nothing of it as the vehicle looked like it had been abandoned, so I kept driving. A few minutes later, I saw the same dark blue vehicle at the back of the road. I thought there may have been others like it, because I didn't recognize the large dent above the right wheel as I drove past the vehicle. It wasn't long before the road turned to gravel and my phone lost connection. My friend has warned me of that, so I wasn't surprised. I took the notes he gave me and found myself at a fork in the road with no markings. One road went uphill, and the other followed a creek. I decided to take the road along the creek, because it was his instructions. As I was driving further, the road got worse, with branches hanging over the road and large patches of water. I was slowing down when all of a sudden I caught sight of something that made me do the same. There was a small white sign nailed to the tree that read "Private Road, no turnaround." That didn't make sense, as my friend has told me the cabin was on this road. I got out and circled around the front of the SUV and snapped a photo of the sign for my friend when I got back. While I was doing this, I heard a motor approaching and turned around to see the dark blue SUV approaching from around the bend. I climbed back into my vehicle and waited for it to pass. The SUV pulled up about 30 yards, and I could see the figure inside the vehicle behind the wheel. I couldn't make out his features as the glass was dirty. After about 30 seconds, the SUV reversed back down the road. I decided to continue as I was already almost there. It took another few minutes to find the cabin, as it was a small one-story building next to the creek, which was exactly what my friend had described. I parked, grabbed my bags, and let myself into the cabin. It had electric and a fireplace, so I settled in and tried to put the strange encounter with the SUV behind me. It was nearly 10 at night when I heard a door slam outside. I figured it was some sort of animal that had wandered up to the porch, but then I heard footsteps walking up to the front door. I stopped eating and listened to the strange occurrence. The footsteps stopped directly in front of the door, but no one knocked. I waited for a few seconds and then looked out the window beside the front door. There wasn't anyone there, but I double-checked outside with a flashlight and found nothing but wet ground. I locked the door again and went back inside. It wasn't long before I heard the familiar engine once more, and I looked out the window to see the blue SUV parked near the creek. This time the headlights were off, so I couldn't see anyone inside the vehicle. I fumbled with my phone trying to call my friend, but I still had no connection. What happened next made me stop and think. The driver's door to the SUV was opened, and a man got out and stood by his vehicle. He didn't come towards the cabin. All he did was gaze at it. I watched him for about a minute before I moved away from the window. I didn't want him to know I was in there. Eventually, the man got back in his vehicle and drove off. I didn't sleep much that night, and in the morning I got up and searched around the cabin. I found some tire tracks in the wet ground near the porch that weren't from my SUV. I packed my things up, deciding it was time to leave. When I got to the gravel road, I saw the blue SUV waiting for me. It was parked right across the road, about half a mile from where I had seen it the night before. This time, the driver's door was open, so I waited in my SUV. After about a minute, the man came walking up from behind the trees and was standing right in front of me. He slowly raised a hand, but I didn't roll down the window. He pointed behind me at the cabin and said something I couldn't hear. Then he pointed at the road and gestured for me to leave, so I didn't argue with him. I drove back and away from the cabin, reversing back down the road until I got to the main highway. I didn't report the strange incident to the police because, in all honesty, I don't think there was anything that would warrant a report. No one hurt me or touched my things, and the man in the blue SUV seemed more determined to get me out of the cabin than follow me around. A couple of days later, I called my friend and told him what had happened while I was at his cabin. He didn't say much when I mentioned it, but he asked me to describe the man and the vehicle he was in. When I told him what I saw, he said that his uncle had sold the land that the cabin was on 2 years ago. I had expected him to say it had been abandoned ever since, but he asked me who bought it. I reminded him he had given me the key himself, but he said those keys were to another cabin that was farther up the creek. I took the paper he had given me and looked at the directions again. At the bottom, in handwriting I didn't recognize, there was a note saying, "If you see the white sign, you turn around." I still don't know who wrote that note or what the man in the SUV wanted me to do. What bothers me the most is that the cabin I stayed in wasn't the one my friend thought I was staying in. I have never gone back to that part of Idaho, and I don't think I ever will find out who was staying in that cabin that night. I was driving home from Coos Bay one Sunday afternoon when I saw the fishing boat for the third time. It would have been nothing if I had not been taking different roads on purpose. My name is Ryan Cole. In 2022, I worked doing maintenance for a few vacation rental companies along the Oregon coast. The work was not very exciting. I liked working alone and having my own schedule. On that Sunday, I had spent most of the day fixing a water heater at a rental place near Charleston. I had driven to Coos Bay to grab a burger before heading to Bandon. It was an afternoon, the kind of day where it feels like the sky is about to rain at any second. I pulled off the highway to a spot with a view of the harbor to eat my meal in my truck when I first saw the boat. It was a white fishing boat, about 20 feet long with a blue stripe in the middle and a small cabin near the front. The boat was out than the other boats in the harbor, slowly moving toward the opening. I did not think much of it, just thought it was another local fisherman. A couple hours later, I stopped at a gas station on the edge of town to fill my tank because the light on my dash had been blinking for miles. While I was getting gas, I saw the white fishing boat again. This time the white fishing boat was on a trailer in the parking lot of a marina across the street. I did not pay attention except for the blue stripe and the small cabin because I thought the white fishing boat was just getting repairs. I filled my tank, bought a bottle of water before getting back on the highway. 40 minutes later, I turned off Highway 101 onto a road that went into a thick group of trees. I had to check some drainage issues at a property there. I parked my truck, walked around the edge of the land. As I was looking over the ground, I saw the boat again. This time the white fishing boat with the stripe and the small cabin was on a trailer right in the middle of the clearing. I stopped moving for a moment because it was impossible to see the boat 3 times, especially on a trailer in a place where there was no trailer before. I called the owner to ask if someone had brought a boat onto the property. He sounded surprised, said no one had permission to be on his land. I walked up to the trailer, looked at it. The trailer was old. The tires were almost flat. There was a license plate on the back. It was mostly covered in mud. I took a photo of the plate with my phone because I knew I had to show the owner. Then I heard a tapping sound coming from inside the boat. It was a knocking sound, and I took a step back. Another knocking sound came from inside the boat, this time from inside the cabin. "Hello," I called out. I waited for a response. When nothing happened, I walked to the side of the trailer to look into the cabin. It was too dark to see anything, so I decided not to go. I finished my work at the property, called the owner one time, and left. The morning the owner went to the land to see what happened overnight, but the boat was already gone. There were tire tracks in the grass, but they did not lead toward the road. Instead, the tracks curved around the back of the lot, disappeared into the trees near a steep drop-off. The owner thought that whoever put the trailer there must have come back to get it during the night. That should have been the end of it. 3 days later, I was working on another rental about 12 miles away when I heard someone knocking on the front door. I opened the door, saw an older man in a yellow raincoat standing on the porch. He looked to be in his 60s, had a long gray beard. "Are you the maintenance guy?" he asked. "Yes," I replied. "Have you seen a boat lately?" he asked. I did not answer away because he had looked past me into the house while he spoke, and I realized I remembered the boat had a blue stripe on the side. "It has a stripe," I told him. "Why are you asking?" I asked. "It belongs to my brother," he said. "Where is your brother?" I asked him. He stared at me for a time before he said, "That is the problem." I did not know what to say. I just nodded, said thank you, and told him goodbye. I watched him walk down the driveway to a green pickup truck and drive away. I made a note of the license plate because the whole situation was starting to bother me. That night I went online to look up the plate in a public records database. I found nothing. The Saturday I was back on the coast near Charleston for another job. I stopped at a marina to buy some parts. While I was waiting, I saw a bulletin board with handwritten flyers on it. Most were ads for lost tools or boats for sale. One flyer near the bottom caught my eye. It was a missing persons flyer from years ago. It had a picture of a middle man standing next to a fishing boat. The man in the picture looked familiar. The boat he was standing next to was the same boat I had seen on the trailer at the rental property. His name was Daniel Mercer. He had gone missing while fishing off the coast of southern Oregon in 2017. They said his boat went down with him and was never found. I took a photo of the flyer with my phone. Left. I decided not to dig into this mystery more. I did not tell anyone about it because the boat in the picture looked like the boat I had seen. That night I was looking through my phone. Saw the picture of the missing man again. I made the picture larger to get a look at the boat. I stopped when I saw something. Hidden in the dirt on the side of the boat were some numbers. I realized those numbers were the boat's registration plate. I made the image even larger. Compared the numbers on the boat to the numbers on the trailer at the rental property and the ones on the flyer. They were the same. I called the marina the day. I asked if they knew anything about the boat belonging to Daniel Mercer. The man I spoke to said the boat had not been found. He said the Coast Guard had searched for it for days after Daniel Mercer went missing in 2017. They eventually gave up, called it a recovery case. Has anyone ever seen the boat? I asked him. No, he said. They only found his body. I decided to ask more about the things happening with this boat. Do you know anything about the man in the raincoat who asked me about it? I asked him. No, he said. Do you know anything about his brother? I asked again. There was a pause before he answered. Daniel does not have a brother. I was about to tell him the story, but then I realized he might have misunderstood me. I told him that the man who claimed to be the brother was a middle man with a long gray beard. Daniel is a child, he said. That was all the proof I needed to know this was not a coincidence. I went back to looking at the pictures I took at the property. Suddenly I saw something in the photo of the boat in the clearing. There was something reflected in the cabin window. At first I thought it was my face, but when I made the photo larger, I could see the shape of a person standing inside the boat. The person was looking directly at me through the crack in the window. I never saw the boat again after that day. The owner of the property sold the land, so I stopped doing work along that stretch of the coast. A month later, I was talking with another maintenance worker. This worker had taken on some of the jobs I used to do. He casually asked me why I stopped working on that stretch of the coast. I told him it was because of something I saw on one of the properties. He responded by saying that he had recently found an abandoned trailer on that land and called the owner to come and investigate the trailer. I asked him what kind of trailer it was. It was a boat trailer, he replied. It was old. The tires were practically dead. He told me there had not been a boat on the boat trailer, which made me feel like I had to ask him if he had seen any footprints around the trailer. He laughed at my question. I have seen one set of footprints, he replied. They led from the trailer to the edge of the cliff. There were no prints coming back down. I think about that conversation often. I wonder if there really was something about that boat, or if there was something else that I just failed to see. Either way, I stopped doing maintenance work at night on my own after that. I always look twice when I see a fishing boat with a blue stripe on the side.